A merchant counts his gold by the lamplight. His children play in the courtyard after coming back from the temple. His city hums, his civilization is by any measure thriving. Then the ships arrive. Economic decline begins. What was once great lies undefended. The second generation does not count gold. They carry it on their backs, in crates, to ports it will never return from. The courtyard is quiet now. The city still hums, but what made it theirs is gone. There are no merchants or children playing around. The third generation is born into the quiet. They have never known the lamplight or the crates of gold that once called their city home. Survival is the only inheritance they received, and survival has its own morality, sharper, colder, and entirely unconcerned with the ethics of a world they never got to live in. By the fourth generation, the memory is gone. Not just the wealth, the very idea of wealth. The belief that a man could build something and pass it down, that your neighbor could be trusted, that tomorrow could be better than today. It's all gone, like a livid, fantastical fairy tale. These things don't disappear in a single moment. They erode, generation by generation, famine by famine, humiliation by humiliation, until the people who remain don't even know what was taken from them. And that is exactly the true essence of colonialism. Everyone measures colonialism in gold, in the $45 trillion extracted from India, in the minerals stripped from the Congo, in the bodies that cross the Atlantic. But gold can be replaced. What cannot be replaced is what died in that fourth generation, quietly, with no funeral, and with no one left to mourn it. The death of hope and self-belief itself. That is what this video is about. When you hear the word colonialism, what do you see? Chains, ships, maps redrawn in red, and none of that is wrong. But it's incomplete, because the conversation almost always ends in the same place. Money. What was taken, how much is owed, and the numbers are staggering. Let's take India. At the dawn of the 17th century, India alone produced roughly a quarter of the entire world's economic output. Its economy was greater than all of Europe combined. One country, 25% of everything the entire world produced. Indian muslin was so fine that European merchants described it as woven air. Cloth so delicate it could pass through a ring, a fabric that moved like mist in the light. Across the Indian Ocean, ships carried spices, textiles, and goods through trade networks that had existed for centuries, markets that connected Africa, the Middle East, and Asia long before Europe arrived. This was not a civilization waiting to be discovered. This was one of the centers of the world. And yet, by the time the British left, that share had collapsed to around 2%. An utter collapse. So the story we tell ourselves is simple. Wealth was taken, resources were extracted, and an economy was destroyed. And that's true. But here's where the story stops making sense. 1945, Germany. Cities flattened, industry gone, millions dead. 25 years later, an economic powerhouse. 1945, Japan. Firebombed, then Hiroshima, then Nagasaki, and a generation later, a global titan. So here's the question. If destruction alone explains everything, then why didn't they stay broken? Why did they rebuild so quickly, while so many post-colonial societies, decades later, are still trying to recover? The standard answer is that Germany and Japan had strong institutions, skilled populations, and massive external support, and that explains a part of it, but not all of it, because that still assumes the damage was only economic. That what was lost was measured in factories, infrastructure, and GDP. But what if the real damage wasn't what was taken, but what was changed? What if colonialism didn't just remove wealth, but rewired the system people were living inside? Because if that's true, then counting the gold was never going to explain what happened. Neither was it going to fix it. Let's run an experiment. Take the people of Germany, not the land, not the resources, the people. The engineers, the architects, the teachers, the politicians, the culture that taught its children that precision mattered, that craftsmanship was a virtue, and that a deal made was a deal kept. Drop them into the middle of an empty Madagascar. Within a generation, you have roads. Within 2, you have universities. Within 30, you have a nation. Prosperous, stable, globally significant. Not because what was in the soil, but because of what was in the people. Now, let's run it again. Meet Hans. Hans is a German engineer. He builds bridges. He comes home at night to a family that trusts the world they live in. He has a son. He teaches him the trade. He believes with quiet certainty that his son's life will be better than his own. Then the ships arrive. Hans is taken, his tools are taken, his son doesn't learn the trade. His son learns to carry crates to the port under the watch of men with rifles. The bridge Hans built still stands, but it doesn't belong to him anymore. Nothing does. His son grows up, has children of his own. Well, what does he pass down? He has no tools, no trade, no quiet certainty. He passes down the only thing he has, survival. Watch your back, trust no one, take what you can, because waiting for your turn means starving. His grandchildren are born into that world. They've never met Hans. They've never seen the bridge. They don't even know there was ever a bridge. All they've known is the crates, the rifles, and the cold logic of a world that has never once rewarded honesty or cooperation. And then one morning, the ships leave. The rifles are gone, the overseers are gone, and someone stands up and says, "You're free, build something." So now drop Hans' grandchildren into Madagascar. Same land, same opportunity, same empty island that the first Germans turned into a thriving nation in 30 years. But these Germans don't build roads. They fight over who controls the port, not because they're lesser people, not because something's wrong with them in their blood or their bones, but because Hans' grandson has never seen a bridge get built. He's never lived in a world where institutions serve him rather than extract from him. He has never experienced a generation where trust paid off, where cooperation was rewarded rather than punished. The first group of Germans brought something invisible with them into Madagascar, something that never showed up in any census or any treasury. A civilizational confidence, the deep inherited belief that building something was possible, that it was worth doing, that the world could be shaped by human hands and would stay shaped. Hans' grandson doesn't have that. It was taken from him before he was born, and that, not the stolen gold, not the burnt mills, not the redrawn borders, is the true cost of what was done. Hans' grandson is now free. The ships are gone, and he's standing in the ruins of everything that was taken from him. But here's the question nobody asks. What does he think of himself? Not what does he own, not what does he earn, but what does he believe he deserves deep in his bones after 3 generations of being told through law, language, and violence that his civilization was backwards, that his gods were primitive, his language unworthy, and his history worthless? What does Hans' grandson believe he's capable of building? This is the damage that doesn't show up anywhere. Not in Angus Madison's tables, not in the reparation calculations, not in the economist models. It lives here, in what a man believes about himself. Hans' grandson is not alone in this. There's an entire body of work on what systemic humiliation does to a people. What happens when we don't just take from someone but spend generations convincing them that the taking was justified? In 1961, Frantz Fanon put it bluntly. Colonialism doesn't just steal your land, it colonizes your mind, it teaches you to see yourself the way the colonizer needs you to, as backwards, incapable, and unfit to govern yourself. That is where the real damage lives. Because once that belief takes hold, people don't just lose what they had, they lose the instinct to build at all. Innovation depends on something colonialism systemically destroys, the belief that you're capable of creating something new, that your ideas matter, that your civilization is worth rebuilding. But it goes further than that. Colonialism didn't just occupy land, it rewrote identity. In 1835, Thomas Macaulay made the goal explicit: to create a clash of people, Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals and intellect. Not educated Indians, imitations of Englishmen. This wasn't just education reform, it was a deliberate redesign of an entire civilization's relationship with itself. The most capable minds were redirected away from building their own society and towards serving the empire that was extracting from it. And when the empire left, the systems stayed. The laws, the institutions, the standards of success, the buildings changed hands, the blueprint didn't. This is what Homi Bhabha called colonial mimicry, trying to rebuild your world using the tools that broke it, like trying to heal a wound with the same knife that cut you. And that knife wasn't taken when the ships left. It was hidden back, not as a weapon, but as a mirror. Hans' grandson didn't just inherit poverty, he inherited a story about himself, and that story said he was the reason for it. Now, let's go back to Hans in Madagascar. The ships are gone, he's free, and somewhere, a well-meaning foreign government has just wired his new nation $1 billion in aid. The IMF has sent advisors, the UN has sent a constitution, the world has looked at what has happened to him and said, here, this should help, start over. And He tries. But every institution he builds in the image of the ones that were built to destroy him. The courts look like colonial courts, the police look like colonial police. He doesn't have an alternative blueprint. It was never given to him. This is what aid packages cannot fix, what debt cancellations cannot fix, what reparations, as just as they may be, cannot fix. Because the damage ran deeper than institutions, it ran into the people. There's this concept called social capital, the invisible infrastructure of a working society. Not the roads or the factories, but the trust, the shared belief that cooperation pays off, that if you build something today, it will still be yours tomorrow, that your neighbor is more likely to help you than to take from you. Hans had that. He passed it to his son passed it to his grandson. Colonialism ran a century-long campaign against exactly that. It took communities that were fluid and functional and hardened them into rigid, suspicious factions because divided people are easier to rule. The 1901 British census in India was the first time in history when Hindus and Muslims were administered as hard political identities rather than overlapping fluid ones like they had always been. The Rwandan genocide in 1994, 1 million people dead in 100 days, traced a direct line back to Belgian colonial policy, which issued identity cards sorting people into Hutus and Tutsis, calcifying what had once been a permeable social distinction into something immutable, something worth killing over. So, they didn't just steal your gold, they stole your ability to trust your neighbor. And when the colonizers left, that distrust remained, the corruption remained. And here's what the world consistently gets wrong about that corruption. It's not a cultural failure. It is a rational response to the worldly societies we're handed. When every institution in living memory exists to extract from you rather than serve you, when the only people you've ever watched prosper are the ones who learned to game the system, extracting from it yourself isn't moral failure, it's just pattern recognition. Hans' grandson isn't corrupt because something is wrong with him, he's corrupt because he inherited a world where corruption was the only strategy that worked. So, is he doomed? In 1965, on a tiny island with no resources, no hinterland, and no reason for optimism, someone tried to answer this question. Singapore had just been expelled from Malaysia. Poverty was everywhere. Its Chinese, Malay, and Indian communities carried between them exactly the distrust that colonial policy had spent decades deliberately cultivating. The same hardened factions, the same broken social contract, the same inherited belief that institutions existed to extract rather than serve. By every measure this video has described, Singapore should have become another story of post-colonial collapse. It didn't. And the reason isn't what most people point to. Not the trade policies, not the foreign investment, not the geography, is because Lee Kuan Yew understood something almost no post-colonial leader had the clarity to act on. He understood that the deepest wound wasn't economic. It was the broken contract between people and their institutions. That the real thing missing, the thing Hans had and his grandsons lost, was the belief that building something was possible, that the world would let it stand. So he didn't just rebuild an economy, he rebuilt that belief. Corruption was treated not as an unfortunate reality, but as an existential threat to the only thing that actually mattered: trust. Institutions were designed to serve people rather than extract from them. The civil services was paid well enough that integrity became the rational choice, not the heroic one. Education wasn't built to produce imitations of the colonizer, it was built to produce something new. People who believed this place was worth investing in, worth trusting, worth building. And within a generation, something shifted. Not just the numbers, though those came, the invisible thing that shifted, the quiet inherited confidence that Hans once passed to his son, the belief that if you build something, the world will let it stand. Singapore rebuilt social capital, consciously, deliberately, one generation at a time. It's not a perfect story. The methods were often authoritarian, the freedom sacrificed are real and worth reckoning with. But the important lesson is that damage is not permanent. It is not in the blood, it is not destiny. It is not about race or religion, it is a broken social contract. And broken contracts, given enough time and enough will, can be rewritten. So here is what the economists miss. They count the trillions taken from India, the minerals stripped from the Congo, the bodies that crossed the Atlantic. And they're right to count it. Every number is a wound, every number is something real that was built and taken. But here's the uncomfortable truth. You could give it all back, every cent, tomorrow, and Hans' grandson would still be standing in the ruins without the blueprint to rebuild. Because the blueprint was never shipped out. It was never stored in a vault. It was dismantled quietly, generation by generation, in the space between a father and his son. In the moment, a man who built bridges had nothing left to pass down to his son except how to survive. That is what no reparation can reach. Not because repair is impossible, Singapore proved it isn't, but because the thing that was broken wasn't a number, it was belief. The quiet inheritance certainty that building something was worth it, that the world would let it stand, that what you created would still be there tomorrow. That belief built civilizations, and its absence unravels them. Not all at once, but slowly, across generations, until people forget what was ever taken from them. The merchants who counted gold by the lamplight, his descendants are still here. They're building, still trying, against the weight of everything that was designed to make them stop. The least we can do is understand what was actually taken. Not the gold, the belief that you were allowed to keep it. Welcome to Vias, where history shows patterns, psychology explains it, and philosophy asks what you do with it. Subscribe if this made you think. Next video, we'll talk about why good people do evil things, and you might not like the answer. Thank you for watching.